I understand how important it is to have a place called home, and it's frustrating using your hard-earned money on rent. Vic Prasad can make you a homeowner. Get pre-approved services provided to first-time buyers and new immigrants. You can qualify for mortgage even if you have bad credit. Call Vic Prasad now on 604-306-6647. Vic Prasad is associated with Craft Mortgages Canada Incorporated. I understand how important it is to have a place called home, and it's frustrating using your hard-earned money on rent. Vic Prasad can make you a homeowner. Get pre-approved services provided to first-time buyers and new immigrants. You can qualify for mortgage even if you have bad credit. Call Vic Prasad now on 604-306-6647. Vic Prasad is associated with Craft Mortgages Canada.
For astrology service, life horoscope, and fortune telling, marriage problem, love problem, divorce problem, money problem, personal or business, all types of puja and havan. Call Pandit Lakshminath Guruji 1604-849-4872, serving Alberta and BC.
Arvind's Curry and Cocktail, Indian cuisine. They do catering for all occasions and they do free delivery. Please call 604-515-1070. Address is 420 6th Street, New Westminster. Open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. For deliveries, call 604-515-1070 or arvindscurry.com.
Why don't we have sports, drama, music, all those other things that make kids belong?
Yes.
Rather than, somebody coming in trying to get them into drugs.
Yeah. And the last point on that I would say is this youth, the young kids that are elementary school kids, they grow up and they do this business for 3 years, 4 years, whatever. They're the ones that are getting killed, whether they are 18, 19. But there are a lot more into that. The big people, big people, they are making millions of dollars out of this, and nobody touches them because they have this shield around them. Nobody can go near them. So I want to say the people that lose their lives, the parents that lose their children are these vulnerable children who they will not live, like you say, to be 25. They are gone before that. If they live beyond that, they are lucky.
That's such a great point. It's exploitation.
It is.
100%.
And it's at the time where kids don't have the ability or don't think of the future. It's immediate gratification. And that's what they're counting on. Is like right now I can make this much money, not that I'm only going to live for 5-6 years.
Changing the subject, we need to talk about the Pope. We need to talk about Pope that came to town and he spent about 5-6 days in here. He was in Edmonton and met with the people. Do you think, and I know we are not Aboriginal, but we are allies of the indigenous people, do you think that the purpose that he was here for, to say he's sorry, but he never said, I take the responsibility on the churches, like the Catholic Church of Canada, Catholic Church of the world, that I am sorry that this happened to your children. And that maybe people wanted to hear. So did these people, how do you rate his visit?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, not being Aboriginal, but being an ally, like you said. I've heard from some of the Aboriginal people, and first of all, every time you talk about trauma and so forth, it almost re-traumatizes them because they're living that experience over and over again as to it might have been them, it might have been their grandmothers or somebody in their family. So that's one thing that's happened, and it's impacted a lot of the communities. The other thing is with the way he apologized was as if every church had the decision to make. And from my understanding, and I could be completely wrong, is everything came from the head office as to how the nuns were supposed to do things, or the priests, or whoever. And now to turn around and say, okay, it was this church and that church and that church, to me doesn't seem quite right, but I could be, like I said, totally wrong about that, but that is my understanding right now, as in, it was centralized back then. Annie, I don't know if you have a different understanding.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was 100% centralized, right? It was the government's way of kind of making sure that there was someone else involved that could run it, whether that was financially, to have the people to do the work, right? This was a genocidal process.
Oh, right.
And there's 10 steps to any genocide. So I think you're right, both of you. No, we shouldn't be rating it as settlers, right? So from what I've heard, and I'm focusing on people like Brennan Gabriel and Katrina Melinda Bige, who I call them a power couple. Brandon's from the Kwantlen Nation here, who have stated that they are not happy with the apology, even bring up the ideas of, well, by doing this, you're protecting yourself legally from international persecution, even perhaps persecution locally, because those cases will come. Maybe not as many as should be, that's a whole other issue, but certainly I also had that sense of, this is interesting. This is kind of, light remorse, right? To make sure that if you go to court, you can say, oh, but we apologized. Chief Murray Sinclair, sorry, not Chief, but the Senator Murray Sinclair, who led the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, wrote a really good statement that he also was not terribly happy with what came forward. I think overall, we shouldn't be dividing people, though. There are Indigenous people that needed that apology because of the trauma, because of what they went through. And I think absolutely, right? But, I say in Canada, this is not my original thought, but I teach it in schools this way, that idea of redress culture. Canada's really good at apologizing. We apologize for everything. Not that we shouldn't, but we just do. But the reality is, they're always shallow. They never really get to the systemic roots of an issue. I'm reminded of the Kamagara Maru apology, which we watched live at school. And when I had the kids break it down, there was one word missing: racism. And that was like, why wasn't that in that apology, right? So it goes beyond just the Indigenous issue. We can look at many different things, whether it's Japanese, Chinese, it's endless, right? So I think overall it's that absolutely Indigenous people have the right to feel how they want to feel about this apology. The Pope, in a weird way, is not the be-all, end-all, right? But there was the real hope, and I'll finish on this, the doctrine of discovery, this major, papal bull of hundreds and hundreds of years old, that basically, threw to the fire Indigenous people across the world. It helped develop slavery, it helped develop all, colonization around the world. And that was what people wanted. If he had come out and said that this theological doctrine was, at the root, at the root cause of what we did and how we did it, I think that would have been supremely powerful. So I think that, you saw this great, when the Pope was speaking, people actually came forward with a banner that said, rescind the doctrine. So I think that's where we're at. It's that, okay, he apologized, he came, that is a TRC recommendation, so a call to action, it was done. Was it done well enough from an Indigenous perspective from many people? No, it wasn't. It doesn't mean settlers can say then never mind. No. Indigenous people, I think, for many that went, and I had a friend, but an acquaintance, I'll say, Lorelei Williams, who went to Rome, and clearly that was something that needed to be done. It's that taking of that space and that conversation. But until the church rescinds the doctrine, until they really choose people over theology, I don't think people are going to be happy with what happened here.
Yeah, no, you're right on, because if you look at it from a systems point of view, he did not say the system was wrong, that it shouldn't have been done. It's like we talk about systemic racism here.
Exactly.
It's that same type of thing, and so it didn't really go that deep. Yes, he said he was sorry. But it's like if I say, Annie, oh, I'm sorry, but I don't say why and what I shouldn't have done or whatever. It's just doesn't go deep enough.
And it's a pattern.
I think
this is the same church that doesn't allow women to be cardinals. This is the same church that, even though this Pope has been a little bit
more open,
a tiny bit more open towards queer rights, but they certainly don't provide those rights, so I think, people are not idiots, right? No matter who you are, they're looking at the whole picture, and they realize that almost every single time you look at a marginalized community, and all religions have people like this, right? I'm not saying just the Catholics, but in this case, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has never really provided systemic solutions to problems that they are very much part of.
Yeah, and I think everybody, whatever organization it is or government or whoever, has to look at the systems level and see where they can correct.
Yep.
And the people can help them. I mean, in this case, they are. They were holding up signs to say what, what they wanted.
Yeah.
So, but I think we're with the Indigenous people and we support them.
Yes.
But they're really the ones that have to rate how they feel about it. And like Annie was saying, we know enough about what some of them feel. And so that's sort of what we've expressed. It's our own contact. So by no means is that all Indigenous peoples, but
and
So,
I would say have those conversations, and I don't come as an ally, but like if you want to get involved in that work to help that justice forward, then do get involved. Don't be afraid to raise your voice about these issues within your own circles.
Right.
If you happen to be Catholic, if you happen to be whatever you are, what are the conversations you could be having with your own folk so that Indigenous peoples are not the ones always with that burden, but always making sure that it's not just the settler point of view. We're limited in what we can say.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. That was a great insight into
Small talk.
Small talk. Yeah, we can talk all day.
Yes.
The next thing I was gonna say is, we have found out that the CEO of the BC Ferries got fired, and because the reason given was that there's so many cancellation. Ferries were cancelled. People were not able because there's so many people. They live across that side. And they need the ferry to come for medical treatment or whatever, and the people were wanting to go from here. And so, and then he got fired, and I think he was also paid out close to $1 million in payment or whatever you want to call that. People ask, somebody wrote somewhere, and I was reading, he says, just because the ferries did not provide the services that they are supposed to, he got fired. What about the Adrian Dix? There's so many people dying.
Yes, I saw that.
They said, well, fire him too.
Yeah.
What do you think? Our healthcare is, it's no fault of him. Can be a little bit fault of him because he did not take care of the doctors. But doctors are quitting. The nurses are overtired. They can't do this work anymore. And so what is happening with our healthcare in here?
Okay, so first of all, we're looking at one who's a company CEO who is hired.
Who was
There,
hired?
we're looking at a minister who we elect. Two different processes as far as systems go. So if we're unhappy or want us to comment on healthcare, yes, healthcare really needs to be revamped. In fact, when I'm out in the community, I have been saying you should run for health minister, and I'm thinking you don't run for health minister, but that's kind of the thing, because you have to have somebody who understands a systems approach, who understands root causes and prevention, and then you have to put in a system that actually does that. Our healthcare system was created, in the early 1800s, 1900s, around the 1900s, and it was meant to be for emergencies, right? It wasn't a system that could accommodate what it does today. So, first of all, we have to figure out, what do we want our healthcare system to do, right? If we want it to be for everything, then we have to plan and design it for everything, and we have to figure out prevention. Like in my classes when I teach systems in healthcare, what I say is we will never have enough money for all the services we need. Like within the healthcare professions, for those who don't know, I am a registered nurse, so within the healthcare professions, we have been saying since the 1970s that this healthcare system is not sustainable, that there has to be a different system. But what happens is governments change. It's short-term planning. It's looking at making fancy announcements and getting reelected. It's not about what's good for the public. I'm sad to say that, but that's what I've noticed, right? And like you were saying, people will promise things, right? But then does it come to be? So we have to look at holding people accountable, our elected officials. We need to go visit all our MLAs, tell them what we think, and maybe they need to set up a task force. It's about time with all the healthcare professions represented to see what should a healthcare system look like and how should it be split between prevention and services. And in the short term, I can tell you, if we were to switch models, it's going to be pain for communities. And are elected officials willing to put up with that pain, knowing that they may not be reelected because people are going to be in short-term pain? Because if you want prevention, it takes, it takes a couple of decades to see results, right? You're not going to see them immediately. So maybe there needs to be oversight by a citizen panel that tries to figure out long-term planning, and then they're responsible so that the ministers or who is ever there, people aren't saying, oh, it's their fault. Because right now, it's a system that is not sustainable. And we've recognized it for years, but unfortunately, we have not had a single government who gives it priority. Like, if you were told 30, 40, 50 years ago, your system needs to be changed, don't you think you would, like, if you were a private business, you would have done it a long time ago.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't take the things that are happening right now. Like, we hear horror stories, right? Babies being delivered in the parking lots.
Yes.
People waiting, 18 hours to get in emergency. I get calls from individuals who don't have primary care physicians or nurse practitioners, right? So when you look at that, and then we don't have enough any healthcare worker, I was going to say nurses because that's my profession, but any of the healthcare services that are there right now, there's vacancies in everything, right? And why do people not want to go in? Because the people who are already there are stressed, and they're saying, you don't want to do this. You can make more being a plumber, a tradesperson. I'm not knocking tradesperson. I think they're great. But when you're looking at stress levels of somebody's life and whether, my house is going to get extra water or whatever, it's the life that's more stressful. But our wages and our working conditions are not there. I've had students at one of our local hospitals who are there for their final course, learning for their practicum, and they tell me that on one of our acute care units, we had such short staffing that nurses who would normally take care of 4 patients had sometimes 8 to 9 patients. So if you're doing that, how can we improve the care of our population? The other thing that's been lost since, sorry Annie, I'm taking up the time, since I was younger, is we used to have a manager for every unit. And that person was responsible for that unit. And you knew it was their unit. They did everything for it.
Make sure the shifts were
exactly. But now it's everywhere. Like, you've got, in trying to save money, we've got managers that cover a number of units, and then we have staff underneath them. But there's multiple staff responsible for the unit, and it kind of gets lost somehow. So maybe that's a model that we want to look at again. I'm not saying that's the answer, but I'm just throwing things out there that need to be considered. And we have to create a better work environment. Otherwise, we are not going to get more staff. I know the announcements for new nurses. It's going to take us 4 years to produce a nurse. So in the short term, we don't have the staffing. And so a lot of governments do this, and this one did too. We're going to build a new hospital. So if we can't staff what we have, how are we going to staff a new hospital? And on top of that, I haven't heard of any maternity services that could be in there. It's like a cancer center going in. So how much of the load is it really going to take off Surrey Memorial Hospital? I'm not clear on. I am still advocating and saying we need to have maternity there as well. But healthcare is a huge problem. I can talk about it all day. But I'm going to stop and get
I can add 10 more seconds on that.
Okay.
That is that, like, as people know, the majority, which is the NDP, they're the ones who form government during this cycle. They're in the middle of a leadership race, right? And it looks like David Eby, but whatever, whoever gets in. And most likely there'll be a cabinet shuffle, right? Or if not even a shuffle, but like a new cabinet, right? I guess. So I don't know. I don't think Adrian Dix is the be-all, end-all, right? To be honest, right? Perhaps it is time for a change, right?
Yep.
Certainly there have been valid criticisms of how everything's been dealt with. I have to say, like this whole conversation about like root causes and what we're doing as a society. I don't think we gave an easy enough time to our healthcare system during COVID. Why did
Or
we even
even
have to
before
fight
that,
about?
yeah.
Oh yeah, even before that. But in terms of masks, in terms of COVID being airborne, in terms of like, please help us prevent more infection.
Yes.
There was always that push against, and that, and when nurses, I know we were banging the pots.
Yeah.
But then there were attacks against
Yes.
nurses as well.
Yeah.
What, 6 months or
Yeah.
a year after that? And as a teacher, like we know this, right? We go from being the hero to the villain
Yeah.
very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be mindful of that too. We villainized healthcare.
Yes.
We did. And why do you think people want to stay and be abused in such a system? I think there's also, like federally, there has to be more done that way in
Yes.
terms of
Yeah.
dollars, because
Yeah.
it is a provincial responsibility, but federal
federal
can chip in as well. And I would just say I want to be very careful about people that go, well, then we should privatize. Again, living in the States and knowing a lot of people that live in private systems, and I'm not talking about Europe where they have like different models, but in terms of a basic private system, they want people to be sick.
Yeah.
Because it's for profit.
Yes,
And that's
yeah,
not what we want.
yeah.
I agree with Balbir.
Yeah.
Prevention, which takes a very long time, is a much better way forward. I would say we all need to relax. Don't blame the nurses. Don't blame the doctors. And just hope that, the changes that are coming, it'll take time, but hopefully we will get there to finding that solution. But yeah, the shortages are massive. But is it a surprise? We're coming out of a pandemic. We had shortages before. It only makes sense that the shortages are really acute right now.
And I think the best way to stay healthy right now, so that you don't end up in the doors of the ER and the hospital. And 1 million people here, BC, doesn't have family doctors. That's a sad
Yeah,
reality.
I don't have one. I'm trying to find one.
Yeah, so it's a sad reality in there. Changing the subject from that, do we only have one candidate for the premier?
Yeah.
Do you think that because finally I hear that he has put his name out, that he wants to be the premier, do you see that there may be some other challenge for him coming out? Do you think, or that's gonna be, and he will be the premier? As much as I like him, but I also want to see some competition.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, all the big names that we were thinking of are all turning around and supporting him.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if anybody else is going to come forward. And the other thing, it being between elections, and then maybe the party doesn't want to go through that leadership race. Everything costs money, and coming out of COVID, resources are drying up. And so that could be part of the reason too. I'm not sure, but I honestly don't see too many people jumping up and saying we're going to throw their name in. Yeah, I mean,
I think optics matter, and because of all the crises that we're in right now, a leadership race just seems like a waste of time and a waste of effort, and focusing on the issues. I'm not saying that he shouldn't be questioned, right? And I hope that in this process, whatever that looks like, that's still put out there, that people are willing to ask the questions that need to be asked about the direction and whatever people want to ask. He seems to be out there. I know I saw him yesterday at the Pride Parade, and I hope he continues to be that open and to be able to visit in communities and getting that, but also I just want them to, they are the government, so to govern, to actually get things done. And, the more you kind of look at yourself all the time, what does that mean for the actual province? So I don't know, right? I mean, of course, if people want to run, they should.
They should, yeah.
I know EB's a big name. He's been around, he's relatively young, but he's done a lot of things that shouldn't make anybody afraid to run, right?
Yeah.
But also, almost all the MLAs have basically backed him at this point, if not all of them. So that's usually the pool where people would come from. Yeah.
So the last question, very quickly, I was going to ask you about the tent city, tents in downtown East Side. And there are about 800, they said.
Yeah.
And there were about 150 fires in the tent where they were putting the tent. And so the fire department has approached the city to be able to bring the tents down in case there's a fire, it's going to be more damage and people need to move, or that maybe who never. So what do you say? Do you think this people should be, there is no housing under this government, how many locust housing are social housing has been built. I'm not blaming one government, either city of Surrey, city of Vancouver, or the provincial. I think all the three levels of government has to be taken responsibility for them. And they said, well, people don't want to move. Well, you are not providing a place for them to move. If you do have that, then we'll see whether they're going to move or not. So what's your take on that? What do you think of the fire?
I think we are absolutely blind. We complain all day about the cost of housing. I can't afford a house. My kids won't be able to afford a house all day long.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to ask the question about, so what happens when you don't have the money?
Yeah.
And you're being displaced because of gentrification of various areas,
Yeah.
and you have COVID and the realities of people having lost their job. Like, there's a million things going on here that are leading to more and more people being on our streets.
Yeah.
I'm sure the fire department had legitimate reasons for what they said, but we know this is an excuse used all the time against tent cities.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it's not dangerous, right? That if that's the reality, that's the reality. But I also know that when they opened up a street market to kind of get that off the streets,
Yeah.
they gave them a little alleyway. And I thought, how is that? And cause I do frontline worker field studies with my students,
Yeah.
and we heard from people that are like, it's this tiny space, overcrowded. There's a police car right there at the front of it. So you're creating this environment where people don't want to be. And what happened? Naturally, people just started setting up outside, right, on East Hastings.
Yeah.
And yes, it has gotten incredibly bad, right? I've never seen it that bad before.
I haven't either.
The reality is, okay, so I guess they're late now, but let's say by next week, if all these tents are gone, so where are they going?
Yeah, where are they
Where
going?
are they going? And being mindful that we just came out of a shooting spree against homeless people.
Yeah.
So there is stigma and there is stereotyping and there is violence against homeless people every day. And we're not really willing to do anything about that either. So I do think there's a blind spot here, right? We're living in a completely unaffordable space. And it's causing those at the lower end no choice but to find their way out there. And trauma is part of it. A lot of these people do not trust the government. You tell them, here's an apartment, they're not going to trust that space because maybe they've been abused in that space. Healthcare is not treating them properly,
Or
policing,
infested or
right?
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so there even my own dad when he first came here had said he walked into an SRO because he needed a really cheap place to stay and he chose to sleep on the street rather than be in that hotel.